Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the 26th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of von Clausewitz Vom Kriege, the title being Means Left by Which a Theory is Possible. The difficulties are not everywhere equally great. The text follows. Two means present themselves of getting out of this difficulty. In the first place, what we have said of the nature of military action in general does not apply in the same manner to the action of everyone, whatever may be his standing. In the lower ranks, the spirit of self-sacrifice is called more into request, but the difficulties which the understanding and judgment meet with are infinitely less. The field of occurrences is more confined. Ends and means are fewer in number. Data more distinct, mostly also contained in the actually visible. But the higher we ascend, the more the difficulties increase, until in the commander-in-chief they reach their climax, so that with him almost everything must be left to genius. Further, according to a division of the subject in agreement with its nature, the difficulties are not everywhere the same, but diminish the more results manifest themselves in the material world, and increase the more they pass into the moral and become motives which influence the will. Therefore, it is easier to determine by theoretical rules the order and conduct of a battle than the use to be made of the battle itself. Yonder physical weapons clash with each other, and although mind is not wanting therein, matter must have its rights. But in the effects to be produced by battles, when the material results become motives, we have only to do with the moral nature. In a word, it is easier to make a theory for tactics than for strategy. So, finally, a longer paragraph that, however, outlines broadly certain perspectives that we have already seen in the previous paragraphs. Here, however, there is an inversion, let's say a first step, about I would say the perspective on the possibility of building a theory of the art of war. Von Clausewitz is about to tell us that it is possible, anyway, to have a theory of the art of war, however, without the presumption of it to be a positive one, that is, to have a manual that tells you literally what to do at every step, which would be impossible and would be of no practical use of sort, right? And this explanation of mine is kind of a trivialization of the concept, because every person understands that this is not possible, but there is this further belief that by some extra calculation we can, however, reach to that knowledge simply by empirical and kind of material means, right? And this is what we have observed now for quite a long time in this series to be impossible, wrong, and actually harmful for waging war, right? And not just because, unfortunately it wouldn't be like that, because war is waged always in the same way. What von Clausewitz makes us aware here is that there is a great shock, let's say, that we get once we enter in war that obliges us to behave the way eventually in war we do. Like, even if we don't have preconceived, let's say, we don't have a notion what that actually is. And so von Clausewitz is rightfully attacking intellectualism, like thinking that war is something you can calculate abstractly out of the blue, just with your speculations about what should be and not be done, without having reality in front of you, right? So that's where he eventually sets the ground for more robust theory. So what von Clausewitz is saying here is making us reflect on, however, how building a theory of the art of war presents with certain heterogeneities, dependingly on which scale of warfare we're talking about. Fundamentally, here von Clausewitz outlines the difference between tactics and strategy in a bit of a simple, not simplistic way, to make us better understand probably what the deal is. But you have to imagine it kind of a ladder, like, with a gradual scale that goes from what happens on the battlefield and what happens at the top, right? And as we have seen, what happens at the top is radically more important than what happens at the base, right? Because there is a hierarchy involved, so what happens at the top is dramatically more important because it has an immense impact on what happens on the ground, the actions of which, from the individual perspective, are much less important. So, already from the title says means left by which a theory is possible, which is what we have seen, that theory is possible, otherwise von Clausewitz would have not written his book. But in brackets, the difficulties are not everywhere equally great. So what we just said. So he starts by saying two means present themselves of getting out of this difficulty, that is, the impossibility of the construction of a positive theory of the art of war. And he says, in the first place, what we have said of the nature of military action in general does not apply in some manner to the action of everyone, whatever may be his standing. That is, von Clausewitz has talked in general terms about the difficulties that arise from attempting to draw this theory, right? And saying it doesn't make sense to see this as, in fact, something positively, purely mathematically, rationally calculating, because actually most of it is not. Like the way we act in war is not, and couldn't be otherwise. Not because we are more emotional than rational. On the contrary, it's exactly because we are rational and we are able to understand that what happens on the field requires a completely different approach than just abstract theoretical thinking. But the measure in which this happens is different depending on who you are on the field. And this is what von Clausewitz prepares us to say. Because he says then, in the lower ranks the spirit of self-sacrifice is called more into request, but the difficulties which the understanding and judgment meet with are infinitely less, right? So this is pretty clear. We've seen it at one point in the previous videos when he talked, not immediately the last ones, but still, the ones dealing with what is required, let's say, to the soldier and to the officer in part. And eventually up to the commander-in-chief, right? So in the lower ranks, what is more requested? In fact, the spirit of self-sacrifice. Now, it's important that von Clausewitz stresses this aspect, right? That is objectively true. Like, it's an extremely concrete statement. Literally, who goes in the first line goes there to kill and get killed, right? And there's no other way to put that. War couldn't be fought in any other way. And war is always fought in that way. That is, it's not that there is an evil guy at the top, like that just say, okay, I don't care, I will let people die in the front line because I'm so evil. And then no, war can be done in one and only way, and there wouldn't be war in the first place. I'm frankly disgusted. If you look at even recent movies, I won't make specific names come out, but the story is always the same, right? There's this pure, timid and romantic little soldier that goes out in war, and there's the cold, crazy officer that sends him to die. No, if anything, it's the other way around. There is a greater, much greater intelligence at the top than there is at the bottom, and this is not a moralistic statement. Like, this is an objective statement. Some of the most soundest statements you can make in terms of discipline, of competence, of hierarchy, and that's always how as it is on average. Like, you can find the officer that is completely nuts and that's meant to die, but that's because maybe he's mentally ill, right? Not because he's an officer, because the way we have built our own structures and our own hierarchies make it happen so, right? And all this attitude towards the poor soldier, who is a person who never did anything wrong in his life, was sent to the battlefield just was so pure and innocent. No, this is also false, because we know that masses are actually moved by some of the lowest, most radically violent instincts that humans are capable of doing. This is reflected in politics, in society, and there is no need to go to war to see people actually killing each other without giving a damn about it. And war is actually the only place where this is practically justified, because it's effectively directed from the top in order to achieve something that, as cruel and as horrible as it can look, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I stress this aspect because it seems today as if, even things like World War the First or World War the Second were fought just because there was the evil guy at the top. No, there were, evil humans in large masses doing evil things, and it's impossible to draw a sharp line. Of course, there was a kind of a better side and a worse side, but in general, you have to understand what humans are in the first place, and not focusing on the obsession of the tyrant as an excuse to command what entire cultures and mindsets and civilizations actually did, because they were objectively driven by certain beliefs and certain so the myth of the poor soldier sent to the front just because otherwise he would die is pure nonsense. No war can be fought if there is no consensus about it. Even if if Hitler or Stalin had like 49% of consensus, they could have not waged war, right? And this is important to remember because von Clausewitz told that, but also we will see it better at one point. And I think it's disgusting how we are, de-dramatizing the evil, how we are essentially making fun of the evil without being able to recognize it anymore. Because this is what I think what this civilization is about. We're obsessed about, now that there's an immense revival about World War II movies, in which everything is kind of, ever more superficially told. I mean, where are those stories that actually go take a deep look, even with a certain degree of cultural and intellectual awareness and refinement about political and social issues? We are making parodies of what happened in the past. We're growing entire new generations that actually do not know any damn thing about World War the First, about World War the Second, about the Holocaust, about what happened in Maoist China. What Imperial Japan did in China, so it's bipartisan, and we and lots of other things, of course, out there, of every totalitarianism and dictatorship that ever existed. We are simply joking about everything. We fall into stereotypes, we fall into wishful thinking, we stop studying, we stop learning, we don't give a damn, we don't realize that there are massive, important structures that have to be learned, like spitting blood on them, because they're pretty damn difficult. No, it's just a band of morons who goes out there and pretends to tell people what they feel more than what they actually understand. But this is the real point. This is the real problem. We are throwing away our intelligence, and the reason is that it's not all so dark, because after all this happens because we live in better times, and also thanks to the fact that we're people who fought back in the day against evil. But this is also no comforting, and things can really represent themselves in different ways, because history never repeated itself, not even a single damn time. This is another bullshit that you hear all the time, that history repeats itself. If you think that history repeats itself, basically you're acting like the people who von Clausewitz was criticizing, like people who think that you can identify reality just through manuals and saying, oh, this is like that, this is like that. So becoming an imbecile who reasons in binary systems, and that doesn't understand anything about the complexity of reality, and is not even able to understand what is actually going on, right? So yeah, today I'm kind of I don't know, you caught me in bad mood, but I still hope to tell things straight the way they are, because they are like that. And there is an incredible mass of people that is creating an incredible attrition in this civilization, just because they're bunch of lazy asses were not even able to read or understand what they read, right? And that's the problem we will have to face at one point in our history, much before than others, like that today we identify as important as they can be, right? It's a problem of intelligence, and it's a problem of information. This is the real problem. But aside from this, what we were saying here is that self-sacrifice, of course, is called more into request in the lower ranks. People in war really literally have to throw away their own lives against machine gun fire, against bayonets, under mortar shelling. That's what it is. Like, that's how ugly as it is. This is war has nothing heroic in itself. When you see a corpse torn into pieces, what's glorious about that? It's just a human being dead, or at least what remains of him, and that's it. That's literally what it is. And that person self-sacrificed herself. But von Clausewitz warns. So as von Clausewitz actually at one point says something like courage that is kind of positive. Like it's a noble character, right? It's able this idea of self-sacrifice is probably great, but still this should not be confused like the most important thing. This is what tribal warriors thought war was, because their society was so primitive that that's what they had to resort to in order to make a difference. Civilizations, more advanced societies know that self-sacrifice in itself, it's not a big deal at the end of the day. Like, it's a big deal for the people who die, but not for winning a war. And this is as tough as it gets, literally, because that's literally reality. So that instead, von Clausewitz says in fact at lower ranks, the difficulties which the understanding and judgment meet are infinitely less, right? So this is the one of the common of the average private is basically the ground of a lot of action, right, in a relatively few understanding and judgment, right, which doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right, but it's much less. It's as few as you can get. Then maybe that person is a genius. How many Teslas or or Einstein that died on the fields, in fact, of World War I, World War II, and on many other battlegrounds throughout history. But still, war is a different matter, and that's not entirely what that individual needed. And of course, there are bad soldiers that would be excellent generals, and there are excellent, bad generals that would be excellent soldiers. This happens because our societies are also messed up. Yes, hierarchies do work, but they are not perfect, of course. That's why we constantly fight for refining them. And von Clausewitz goes on with the description of what happens at the lower ranks, because he says the field of occurrences is more confined, right? The field of occurrences is more confined. Of course it is. Like, there are less things you have to take care of. In fact, he writes ends and means are fewer in number, which doesn't mean they're not like big deals, as self-sacrifice proves, right? But it's simple as literally like assaulting a machine gun nest under the same machine gun fire, right? There is not much of an understanding about it. If you get shot, you get shot. It just takes a lot of courage, a lot of guts, and hoping your NCOs and officers know what they're doing, right? But their task, in terms of understanding and judgment, in fact, is much higher than your own one, right? You just have to stay there and remain alive. That most of the times is impossible, because that with a certain operation there is already a certain estimated number of dead, in a certain number of dead, and you can be kind of good at saving your own skin, but statistically speaking, there's not much you have to do, right? All this obsession towards the individual perspective, thinking that it is what actually matters, it's probably the greatest optical distortion that we address when we think about war. Single soldiers do not win wars, right? You don't have to, even von Clausewitz with his theory of fog of war and attrition, tells us that even as a minimal, the theory of games, right? Even a minimal change can cause a massive disaster. The problem is that we don't even realize that, and that nobody does. That there are things, and everything changes, and everything, and to pretend to find the connections at one point, it's useless. And this is what in the entire Clausewitz, in practice, because in theory it would be something important, right? But we can't, because we can't measure this system. It would be something infinitely huge. How could you do that? We would have at this point sorted out everything about reality existence. Instead, it's not the case. So von Clausewitz knows this, and knows also that we'll never arrive at that point. So what truly matters is to realize what matters substantially, what happens when you're out there, and how you can cope with problems in a kind of efficient fashion and intelligent fashion, so that you can make a difference without staying there calculating what reality is, right, and actually dealing with the reality in the first place. And of course, what he says here, ends and means are fewer in number. Of course, there's a very few things you have to do after all, and think at when you're a soldier. That's why soldiers are trained mechanically speaking, while officer schools are something more complex, and there is rightfully a higher investment in those than in a troop. But it's obvious. It's always been like this in every single time in history. It can't be in any other way. It's that universal, because war in this sense is always the same at the core. Then everything changes when it's applied, but that's reality. In fact, that's what von Clausewitz says. We can't frame within a realistic understanding of. And then he goes on and says, in fact, data is also more distinct in this situation, which is true. Like it's like the machine gun nest. Like there's not much to think about that. You know it, you see it, you have to storm it. Like you're probably you're trained to do that. Hopefully, this. And those things that are actually many, right? Here we don't have to misjudge the importance that even, in fact, the individual training has, but it's still something that enables you to do something kind of more intelligible, like in terms of outcomes as well, of causes, etc. Data is more distinct, yet in absolute terms, it's not even that, right? So there are lots of things you don't know at every given moment, right? And von Clausewitz goes on saying, okay, mostly also contained in the actually visible. This is also important. Like what you see in the visual dimension is important, right? Very important for also the way we evolved actually as animals. Like we are very wired to vision. Like we can understand a lot of things, especially in combat, like what is going on through vision. That it's so immediate, it's so effective, right? What is contained, like at a close range, what a soldier has to do most of the time is naturally more simple to understand at that point, to assess, but it's limited, right? Of course, a general would love to have a soldier's view of what the hell is going on in every moment. Like we can't do it at some point, but of course we can't process every soldier's perspective because we don't even understand where they are at that point. Maybe or the time spent calculating that at the moment of action could take away precious time for whoever is watching. Like aside from surgical operations and extremely planned actions, everything is also in fact irrelevant at one point under this point of view. But the visibility it also has its own limit. You can't see more than much. You don't know what is happening along the whole front when there is a major offensive. Yeah, you're out there, but basically you don't understand a freaking damn what the hell is going on. What do you think, that people that participate to battles actually know how battles went? Right? You can say, well, but probably not even people who were outside of it. Well, it depends, but yeah, okay, it takes a lot of studying and a lot of knowledge, and that's exactly the point. The soldier takes place in a battle. Most of the times, doesn't understand a freaking damn of what the hell is going on in the first place. And this happens throughout all military history. Take eyewitnesses of battles and tell me, if they actually tell you what it really was. That's our problem as military historians all the time. Nobody frankly understands what it is that and we have a great hard time to even figure out whether what you are reading is invented to make sense, because there is this need for rationalizing rational explanations that, however, are pretty difficult to frame most of the times. And the whole picture is really that messed up. Don't think that there is even the slightest chance of criticizing von Clausewitz under this regard. It's really that messy, right? And that's why we have developed certain communication, like a certain relations among, and thinking about organics, hierarchies, communications, information systems to deal chiefly with this problem, right? But still, entrusting a lot of responsibility to who is on the field, but also, and more than everybody else, who is at the top, who is not on the field, and has to frame this information, because their synthesis capacity is literally the single most important thing in war. And in fact, this is what von Clausewitz talks about here. He says, the higher we ascend, the more the difficulties increase, until in the commander-in-chief they reach their climax. So that with him, almost everything must be left to genius. Now, this is very important, right? So here, the more we ascend to the top, the difficulties increase, right? And this is not just because people are not out there. It's because they have to, because as we have seen here, if you have to check the front, not even the guy from the front knows what happens throughout all the line, right? But not even a very close range from one another. So there's an enormous problem of framing all what is possible to know, and trying to sort it out, like to get an impression of what is going on. And there is a great sensitivity in this. It's not just a matter of intelligence, as we've seen. Von Clausewitz says here that it has to be left to genius proper and talent in practice too, because that's what is gonna make the difference. Like following intuition and kind of having seen things before as well, so that you know what it is. And that's why hierarchy also is built up, like you can make a career through it, because objectively, and von Clausewitz knew this pretty well, because he had started from the lowest ranks to the very top. And in a period of the major war that mankind had ever known at the time, in Napoleonic times, all the various wars, let's say better, that gives you an enormous edge for understanding what the concrete problems on the field are. It's like we all know, like if we are expert about something, we have experience about something of any sort, we know, as a matter of fact, that experience firsthand is priceless, or at least it actually always has a price, but it's very, very valuable at the point in front of certain theoretical statements. It actually, it has an infinite value, right? And it's all very, very important to understand. Like these are all things that we have seen throughout our series, but it's never enough to repeat them, because actually this is the very core of the Clausewitz theory. Like aside from quotes and mentions and phrases, etc., if you get this, you already understand a lot about this all. And it's very important to bear it in mind constantly. It's not just a passage that you can say, okay, well, I read it now, I can't forget about it. No, this is literally, everything is standing on, right? And not only because there's a lot of other things, but this still is vital. And probably one of the single most important thing. And actually, I say this very often in this videos, because it's as if from this sparked lots of other elements, and also we have seen why this is the case, and also this is a complex thinking. It all derives from things we have observed, that we have kind of demonstrated, and that however showed us, unlike many theories would like to do, that actually the great problem here is that everything is way more complex than it seems. That this is no joke, that you can't make a synthesis of it by saying, okay, well, it's a bunch of things you have to remember, the rest doesn't matter. Like sometimes I read or listen to all these discussions on even the same von Clausewitz, this military thinkers, deep military thinkers, that try to explain you what von Clausewitz really is, and they came up with a few concepts that are okay. Many of them actually know von Clausewitz and they say sensible things, but they tend to reduce everything to like two aspects that are partial. This is a theory that works more like, you can't make a list of things here. It's a whole concept you should able to pierce through with your understanding, and to follow like a violin note that starts floating, and it's difficult, but it's harmonic. In a way, you'll never see any other theory about this issue. So it's very important to follow it all the time. So further, von Clausewitz writes, according to a division of the subject in agreement with its nature, the difficulties are not everywhere the same, but diminish the more results manifest themselves in the material world, and increase the more they pass into the moral and become motives which influence the will. Right? This is very important. So here we have, of course, the repetition that every field of human action has its own difficulties, but this doesn't mean that they are all equal. Right? Always bear this in mind. And another problem I think we have as a society is that we think that everybody has the same problems that others have, or that we are all somewhat special, that our opinions all matter. There is probably, no greater lie than the alleged presumption of human equality. Every person is different. In a valuable sense, that is, there are people who are more useful and others that are less useful, right? And there is nothing about that. And of course, this is not about making a list about who is more useful or less useful. This is an extremely valuable information we should emphasize to build our society with hierarchies and competence, because that's all we need. That's what we're biologically programmed for. We need competent people at the top, nothing else. No other criterion of any sort. Doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like. As long as you're competent, you should stay at the top. The rest is all garbage, utter garbage, right? So this is important. Never lose track of the actual substance of difficulties. Don't think that everything is difficult and I wonder where it is. No, there is a way to test out how difficult things are, right? But you are the only measure of this. You're the only one with your mind can learn this stuff. So that's also extremely valuable and empowering, because it tells you how much people can do actually if they are exposed to understanding, to knowledge, and which helps them to understand. It's not so immediate. Like, you need a reason, you need some measures for doing this, but it's still very important. It's still all what we need to go out there and do it, because otherwise we can't learn anything. So everything goes in agreement with its nature, right? And for this reason, difficulties are not everywhere the same. But diminish the more the results manifest themselves in the material world, and increase the more they pass into the moral, and become motives which influence the will. Now, and here also there is all the theory of von Clausewitz. So here you see, material stuff is kind of easy to understand. Things get rough when this matter is being used by someone. That's why I say that technology is actually worth nothing by itself, because literally, technology is literally worth nothing. What would you do with a computer in 100 BC? Like, what application could you do with that? Even you think that with our own physics, we could go there and start building skyscrapers or flying planes? That no, you wouldn't be able to applicate that in that system. You need some application. You need a doctrine of employment that renders it possible on a ground. That is what you smash your face into when you try to make things work which are not supported by reality, including theory. And that's why theory is actually the most important of these all, because when you start to take into consideration what influences the will, so when things pass into the moral dimension, that is not how an M16 operates, but how actually it is manned by someone, well, that's when things are starting to be really rough. Because everybody knows how an assault rifle works. The problem is that individuals can use it in different ways, in different situations, in different contexts. And this changes everything. So, of course, these are kind of instruments that are designed for a certain use in a certain context, but that's exactly the point. They've been modulated like that because there is an environment around which they have to be modulated, and this environment is not merely like physical, it's not material, it's largely mental. It's about how our society's evolved. It's about how people make war. People don't make war because technology exists. People make war with technology, which is a wholly different thing, right? And in here there would be a lot of other considerations also about nuclear warfare. That is when people go nuts and they start thinking essentially that it's about the technology that makes the world difference. No, it doesn't, because it would at this point we wouldn't exist anymore. Because we would have already died already into a nuclear holocaust. We're not ants that if they were in charge of our weapons would destroy the world with atomic bombing in a few weeks. We are human beings, and this is what makes all the freaking difference. An enormous difference, a radical difference. And that's the reason we're keeping to fight the way we've always done. And with a political will. Because there is not even a single freaking moment in which war is not chained by politics. There's not a single moment in which war breaks free the way it could theoretically be. That doesn't exist in reality. It never existed, it never will, and all we have to understand, therefore, is it's politics. It's not war. War is just an instrument. It's like, a tool. That's what it is. That's only what it is. And that's why the radical misunderstanding of war is reflected into these individual perspectives, because they are the simplest ones. Like, everybody can watch a movie about a soldier shooting to someone else from a first-person shooter perspective, right? When you start talking about strategy, nobody understands a freaking damn, because if they haven't studied the historical context, they don't even know what you're talking about. That's what it is, and that proves that we are largely dumb, that we are largely uneducated and illiterate about military topics, because that's how far we get. And it means it's normal, because it's not that we can't create a society that knows about war, technically speaking, certain levels, but definitely we can have a society that actually is aware about what von Clausewitz here is saying. Because after all, yes, this is a kind of a extremely complex theory, but we study extremely complex theories even in school. Like, it's not that because things are complex in school you don't study, history, philosophy, even physics. Actually, physics, we start from the bottom, so theoretically should be able to understand it all for the way it is, but we can make a synthesis of this and actually teaching kids to be aware about the world they live in and how it works, what it means politics, what it means war, what it means society. There is a moral disorientation about these topics that is frankly mind-blowing. Then it's extremely worrying. And I think it's never happened before, because before, it's not that we had an actual big deal of, democratic understanding or anything, but at least we lived in a world where we were at more direct contact with things that happened. Like, at the point we had even some control of them, right? At this point we don't, right? And it's fine as long, once again, who is at the top is competent, but if you rise up a society of ignorance, politicians will be ignorant as them. Right, so when you complain about your own politicians, like, look at yourself in your mirror, in the mirror, and look at it, because it's literally the same thing. That's what culture basically is. It's not about the evil guy you have to blame every single time he breaks, right? It's about the whole society. If you are unhappy about who rules your country, look at your country, because that's where the problem is, not in the guy. right? And there is, unfortunately, this tradition in half of Western civilization, like half of the countries in the West, that basically the big deal is the evil guy at the top. Like, it's never the people. Like, the people are all innocent saints, poor lambs to be butchered right now. It's the evil guy at the top, and that's literally where most of the problems stem from, and actually produce radically violent cultures. Like, there are certain countries that, by democratic advance, whatever, because of this misunderstanding, have extremely tearing, violent political cultures for this very reason. Because the more you distance yourself from actual reality, and the more you become radical and violent, because that's the only way it happens, right? So it's difficult. Of course, even societies are very complex, and societies can't, sadly enough, societies can't work even with non-democratic principles. Like, there are, dictatorships and totalitarianisms that actually make clever political moves for themselves, but of course that's not a very happy world to live in, right? But still, society, and this is what I would like to make you understand, is more complex than what it seems. It moves in a way we have an extreme difficult to track at this point, and we're not prepared to it, because we're expanding that fast. We are intertwining our society so much with one another that we lost track of the connections. That's why I shared the other day on Facebook, the Schwerpunkt account, that article about that public opinion is becoming proxy war. Well, it's already become, telling the truth, and that's exactly the point. Thinking about disinformation, thinking about how even history is taught. You think that here we joke because you think history. I think it's ridiculous. Like, with people, many people, most people, I believe, think that history is just this thing from the dust that you take to engage yourself, like to spend a time. To have a time of thinking about abstract things. History is literally the most concrete thing that we know about our own world, right? It's about the world politics, it's the world society, the world wars, right? That's why we should read about it. We can't do without. That's where you have to start from. If you really care about this problem, because otherwise you think it's a flat land where everything can be reduced to black and white, and that's all that matters. It's not like that. I think not even a 4 years old reasons like that, if you think about it, and that's what it's worse. Like, the thing about stupidity, it's not lack of intelligence. It is the evil in being intelligent and not making use of your own intelligence. That's like the greatest sin ever. It's people knowing that things are complex, reducing it to extremely simple things. That proves they're really stupid, and you should be telling them that they are stupid, and you should marginate them. I mean, I personally don't think there is anything wrong in marginating people on the basis of their stupidity. Like, there is no other excuse. Like, that's the best thing you can ever do. Stupid people out of the way. That's how it should be, right? Marginating stupid people is something sacred, right, just, and should be practiced increasingly, because that's the only way you can make stupid people realizing that they're stupid and changing their mind, because that's what they have turned into. Like, they're forcing themselves in being stupid. That's what the Enlightenment. Read Beantwortung der Frage, was ist Aufklärung? That man can't. That's the answer. The Enlightenment is taking away the person from the darkness in which they have put themselves. Right? Let's eradicate violently this excuse that it's the evil people that make people behaving in a bad way. It's people that behave the way they can every time. And that's all and exclusively their own responsibility. The guy who was sent at the front by the terrible dictator is not justified being there, because otherwise he would get shot. Because if he had some gods, he would have revolted. And en masse, they would have overthrown the dictator. Because that's what history teaches us. That happens all the freaking time. So this garbage has to end, because I'm looking at my own world where I've grown. This is my culture. This is my civilization. We are destroying it, and we can't behave like that anymore. And it's worrying. It's terrifying. And I know I get heated up by talking about these things. That's exactly what I want, because these are really the things that matter. The rest doesn't matter, right? The rest doesn't matter. But going back to von Clausewitz, what he's helping us here with is saying that we have seen that not only things get more complex when they pass from material dimension to the moral one, but also that they become extremely important at the point of influencing the action, the will, right? You know, what do we know things about? In order to follow up, like to do something about it, I want to base with that knowledge. So, as a consequence, these moral problems that are the most incalculable are, however, still the ones that have the greatest importance on the way we act. So, this is the problem. And that's why we can't interpret the world kind of just physically, mathematically, or rationally. First of all, because we can't. But secondly, because even if we did that, we should still have to do something about it. You know, even just imagine we had a full physical understanding of what happens in the universe in this very exact instant. Then it's still up to you to do what, you know, to do something about it. And there is no guide. We can't tell you at that point even how you have to react, right? Of course, given that, you know, that knowledge would be like for an instant, because otherwise we would be God ourselves. We wouldn't have any problem, right? But it's impossible, and this is the paradox. We can't, we never will. And whoever pretends that we will is nuts. It's completely nuts. It's not just nuts like it's a dreamer, is using imagination. We will get there. No, we will never get it, by definition. And that person is more likely a criminal, because that's what ideologies are fed by. Of utopias. Whoever thinks to live into utopias is a public danger, right? And this is why, fortunately, at least we are recognizing that things like fascism, communism, it's all the same crap, right? It's utter garbage, and they should be eradicated from the face of the earth. Like ideologies, they should be put down and prohibited for people who want to join politically into them, because they are an insult to the dignity of human civilization. Here we're talking about human civilization, which is probably the single most important thing we have achieved here. Those are insulting it. Hence, they can't be here. Right? Also, of course, we have to be realistic. They will always be here, but still we should make people think about these things that they're freaking stupid. Because this is an autoimmune disease. Like being a fascist or a communist is an autoimmune disease. It's a serious problem. Let's say it's pathological. It's not something to laugh about. It's a disgrace. It's a tragedy for whoever is involved. But we can't help these people theoretically, right? I don't know. In World War II and during Cold War, we needed to kill them, right? So that's how bad it can get. But just to make you understand that this is real. This is not fairy tale. At the same time, here von Clausewitz says, therefore it is easier to determine by theoretical rules the order and conduct of a battle than the use to be made of the battle itself. Now, this is the big deal, and that's why we talk about tactics and strategy, because, you know, theoretically speaking, you can say a battle more or less can be fought in this way, and it's exactly what I'm doing at this point, even if I'm totally desperate, because I found a battle that has enormous amount of sources. It's incredible. I don't know what to do, and to be all translated, it's a mess, but I hope I will make it anyway. But from there you can get some kind of a concrete theory, like how were battles fought at this time. You see, they were fought basically almost in the same way in every situation, by almost making all the difference. Like, no battle is equal to another, but at least you can understand what it is. When, however, you think about what strategy is about, you see how this goes like completely random. Apparently random. I mean, there is always a reason why battles are fought in different places, but understanding those reasons gets extremely more complicated. There's probably nothing more complicated than starting to talk about a war. The simpleton will tell you, well, from the day that the country invaded that other, well, that person can be defenestrated from every military historical study, because that's the utter proof that there is no hope for a person for reasons that has understood anything. There's probably nothing more difficult than starting to talk about why a war exists, what it's caused by, where the conflict stem from the roots that can't be dated back to ever. So it takes approximation. That also is what you need all the time if you want to talk about history, because history is not reality. Just know that everything you read in every single history book is not real, right? It's completely not real. We historians do not write real history. They never did. No human being will ever be able to write real history. Nobody does. Nobody knows. Nobody can. We can't. But we have to approximate, and that's what we live with, and that's why history is so important anyway. And this is the same concept with von Clausewitz' theory of the art of war. The things that nobody can understand what the hell is going on in this world in every single moment doesn't mean that we can't do something about it anyway. There are ways we can solve this, right? And here von Clausewitz just keeping to play with this contrast, because that's what the whole concreteness of all this comes from. He says, so you understand here, conduct of a battle is tactics. The use being made of battle itself is strategy. That's literally the definition of it. Then he writes, yonder physical weapons clash with each other, and although mind is not wanting therein, matter must have its rights. But in the effects to be produced by battles, when the material results become motives, we have only to do with the moral nature. Right? This is powerful, right? Doesn't mean that material things do not have any importance, that you can calculate the trajectory of a projectile and where it lands and make profitable use of it. But whether you have an artillery shell or an artillery piece in the first place or not, or whether the enemy is that you have to aim at, well, that has literally nothing to do with these pieces, right? They have to do with other material dimension of the terrain or whatever. But what matters is, there are people who hate each other as much to be wanting to kill each other, and they decided to go to war, and that's what all matters, right? So whether you have a cannon or not, basically doesn't make any difference a priori, right? It all matters why you got to that point, what you can do afterwards. That's the point. And that's where von Clausewitz warns you and tells you that's when the material results become motives, that we have only to do with the moral nature. Because that's literally what it is. When you're in a fight, you're punching someone in the face. What do you think? Is that about your muscles, the structure of your skeleton? What's it all about? That you want to do that, right? It has nothing to do. And this is how war should be considered. And I will insist on the thing that I say every time in this video, practically, about the obsession about weapons. Like, there is an entire, I think a good 80% of people who study war out there, they're obsessed not even just about the material dimension of it. I mean, in popular culture I'm talking about, of course, but about which weapon is used. I mean, if there is something that military history teaches us, is that whether, when you're out there, what makes the difference is how much you want to kill the person in front of you, not what you have in your hands. Literally. That's how the difference is made. And the cool thing is, well, no, because there were battles in which weapons were important. Yes, they were, but that's because just you pretend to level everything that is behind those weapons and pretend that it's about weapons, which is insane, right? It's insane. So that's where we should start studying war for, and right? It all takes to read this. This has been, guys, this stuff is being written in 1832. 1832. Where were you born? I don't think you were born before that, right? That you missed that. This is here. It's open source. Everybody can translate it. Everybody can study it. This is literally telling you what the hell is war in the first place, for real. Not stupid video games and the movies that supposed to be realistic and accurate. This is the real deal. This is all you need. There is nothing else you need. Nothing else. It all starts from here. And that's where we keep failing, because at this point we are stupid. And you know why we are stupid? Because nobody tells it. You know, we are told constantly diseducated about the ways we live. And at the point we don't even know, we can't consult this stuff to become, worthy of our intelligence, if you will, of human intelligence as such. Now that's very important to me. That's the reason why I'm making all of this, because nobody, as I often say, nobody pays me for talking about von Clausewitz. I'm just doing it because I think it's useful. Go out there, read about, take books, study them. That's the only way to make a significant change in your life. I personally can't consider, how can you arrive to the grave without having enrich yourself with this? This is pure wealth. It's not a matter of, and the beauty of it is that in a certain sense, if you really want to be evil and bastard, is that other people don't know, so it's even cooler. So you can add that pinch of malice, of malevolence, saying I will know more than others. I mean, it's how you understand how valuable this stuff is only when you arrive to understand it. You're not giving a price to it at that point. And why is that? Because it's of moral nature as well. That's also what von Clausewitz teaches us. How can you measure this all? You see how many, I mean, this how many lines are these here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It would be less than 20 lines. And you see how many things you can discover through them. Think about the world Vom Kriege. So going on, we said here that of course the material dimension is important, but the moral nature takes over it. And in conclusion, von Clausewitz writes, in a word, it is easier to make a theory for tactics than for strategy, which we already knew. Not just now, this video, but also much before, because this is actually one of the single most important things you also have to bear in mind. Aside from knowing what tactics and strategy are, but also why they are important. What is the realm of their dimension? You know what is cool about this is that before learning this stuff, you see these names as empty. After you don't just see the name, you see the reality underneath them that functions in the way it is described in here. So it's extremely satisfying, and I hope you can also participate. So are there any final considerations? Can we go further? Well, yeah, of course we can finish von Clausewitz with what. Okay, I can't promise you that I will still be alive, but not even tomorrow. But you can, everybody can read and study von Clausewitz, and I would say, because your question could be you study this stuff for such a long time, apparently, which is not true, but I know this stuff from some year now, so it's not that few objectively, but it's not that I am an expert on this issue. I began to talk about this stuff knowing what von Clausewitz said in a nutshell, and reading stuff about him, but really this opens your eyes. That's why I insist, by reading and studying it, that's why I insist so much on the practical utility of this, right? That's the best I can tell you. Here, it's not because you have to hang out with von Clausewitz, taking some beer, in Burg by Magdeburg. No, in the early 19th century, this is different. Like, this is about realizing that we have a knowledge and putting it to use, which is probably the single most important empowering thing humans have. Like, the potential behind this knowledge is immense. We could like spend entire ages like trying to sort this thing out by ourselves, but we have already here. That's the cool thing. So I know I'm repetitive, but I hope you understand why I say it all the time, right? As for me, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to in my life. I have my own anxieties, my own problems, and whatever. But it's as if there was a light. It's as if you knew that behind this thing there is something. Really, I know a lot of people feel lost. They say, I don't have a true reason for leaving. I can maybe even like doing something, but I don't feel. Just think about what you can give to yourself and the others, because I believe this is what it works like. The best way you can do something for the others is doing something for yourself. Like, so, if you really want to learn new things, right? It's not anecdotal, it's not rhetorical, it's true. If you read a book, you're richer as an individual, right? And you can be a billionaire but still being so dumb you don't know actually what you're doing here. Like, and there are lots of people who have a few in practice but can better themselves to the point of really making a difference. I'm lucky in the measure in which I could do all this without particular pressure in my life, aside from the one I put myself into, like, for getting the job done. But I presume this can change people. I mean, there can be a redemption through knowledge. It can be a victory, like a great achievement. I should talk about this stuff. I don't know, because right now I'm under pressure again. I'm at the last step of some of my important work, so I need to boost my morale as well, because it's tough. It's not easy. A lot of things can go wrong, but Von Clausewitz helps you in this sense. I believe Von Clausewitz gives you something that others don't give you. It makes you realize what your true potential is without lying to you. I'm disgusted by all those motivational speeches you can't find out there. Oh yeah, life is tough, but all it counts is how much you can take. You should take your time and standing up again, and you will realize everything is cool. Go tell that to a depressed person. Go tell that to a person who has lost his parents. Go to tell that to a person who doesn't have a house. What can you tell to that person? Those motivational speeches? You should make them understand why they are in that condition and what they can't concretely do about that. And sure, there is a way to do it, but it's costly. Nothing is done for free. There is not an easy way out of things. Never. That's what von Clausewitz teaches you. We could talk endlessly about this, but for now, I guess it's kind of an extra. Just tell me if you're interested in this stuff. Like, we can't talk about it, because I don't want to transform, like, this channel will be soundly about history. I think as long as I will remain studying it, let's say, which I hope it will happen for the rest of my life. But let's say there is a moral dimension, like, because otherwise we wouldn't be studying history. Let's be honest about it. What do we study history for? For fun? For waiting to die at one point? I mean, there is a real value into this stuff, and we should reconsider it. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here, in case you were wondering. Well, alright, so today I vented all my anger because I started, like, I lost like 3/4 of an hour just because my computer was going nuts. I don't know why. And I hope it doesn't break down. I think it was just one plug that wasn't going. Well, but that's silly. Then the mic stopped working and I have problems with the audio. Here probably some crack. You have heard it because I discovered. I make you hear it. Here, listen to it. Probably. Have you heard it? That was the crack. Yeah, I know you will hate me for that, but I found a way not to make it. So everything should be fine in theory. But yeah, this is the problems I'm battling with, in part just for the mechanical side of the story. And I have to think about all the videos and the topics, and then I have to think about my work, and it's not easy. And that's why I'm under pressure. I need to battle with you. And the Von Clausewitz videos are probably the best for it, because they talk about this same problems. Never think about this is abstraction, it's just military. No, this is an existential work. So for now I will cut it off. I will cut myself off myself, and I just hope that you enjoyed this video as always, and that I don't remember what I say at this point because I inserted a new phrase, a new word that is not usual, but say I will enjoy this video. If you like, share it, otherwise yeah, blah 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 blah. Then, and I hope that that you will have a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.